have a bit of a plan, try to have a bit of a financial cushion, let's say about 3 to 6 months of finances ahead of you, and then make a plan. So whatever it is that you're doing, you within 3 to 6 months can start to generate a little bit of income.
Welcome to Multifamily Insights. I'm your host, John Casman, and I want to thank you for joining us for another great episode. Listen, if this is your first time listening to the show, be sure to hit the subscribe button so you don't miss an episode. And if you're an avid listener, we want to hear from you. Leave us a rating and review. Give us that feedback so we can hear what you love about the show, but also any tips or feedback to make the show work harder for your investing goals. Now, we've got a great episode today. We're going to be talking to Axel, Monsaingeon. They say you're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. So if you want to grow as a multifamily investor, you have to spend more time with other multifamily investors. And an easy way to do that is to join our apartment investing mastermind group today. Just go to casmancapital.com and click on the mastermind button. Now, as a part of this group, you'll get access to expert trainings, group coaching calls, industry news and updates, as well as all of our webinars and workshops, including our 3-hour workshop on raising capital. Again, if you want to be around other multifamily investors that can help you scale your portfolio today and grow your network, make sure you're a part of the Apartment Investing Mastermind. Just go to casmancapital.com and click on the Mastermind button today. Axel has years of experience in the real estate industry and can help guide you through every step of the process. Now, Axel is a renowned real estate economics expert with experience analyzing different markets, and he knows just about everything there is to know about getting your realtor's license and finding the perfect home for you or someone else. Now, he's also doing some development deals and expanding his portfolio, so we're excited to talk to him about that. Let's welcome to the show, Axel Monsaingeon.
Hi, John. Hey, it's great to be here.
Absolutely. It's great to have you on. Say that last name for me one more time. I feel like I maybe rushed it. Did I get it
Axel
right?
Monsaingeon. I'm French. I live in
Monsaingeon.
Quebec and Canada, and so I know it sounds a little bit more complicated, but it's really simple.
Well, hey, my 10 years of French are paying off slightly, so maybe could have used it in the 11th year. But I went over your bio at a very high level. Why don't you take 2 minutes and fill in some of those gaps?
Sure. I actually, I'm a bit of a transplant. I arrived in, I was born and grew up in the French Caribbean, and came to Canada to finish high school. I stayed here, went to university, and did an economics degree, and then I started to. I was convinced I wanted to be a banker, and after a little while, I realized that I find economics is fascinating because it really helps us understand the world we live in. Yet I realized that banking would be extremely boring for my personality. So I ended up working in logistics and supply chain management, completely different, but I thought it was very real. Like we were moving containers, and global trade has enabled us to have the standards of living that we have today. And I really liked it. So after about 2 years of work, I went back to school and actually did a master's degree in supply chain management, and then went full back in the industry. At the time, I had met my girlfriend, who became my wife. We were both working hard in the corporate world, and after about 5 years, I always felt like I could do more. Our son was born, and then I literally waited for my wife to go back to work, so I resigned and then went full time into real estate.
Oh, I love it, man. You talked about growing up in the French Caribbean, moving to Canada, getting into, you wanted to get into the banking world and finances, but ended up getting to logistics and supply chain. And then ultimately had your first child and really kind of did a swap, let your wife go back to work. And then you kind of transition full time to real estate. Let's talk about that transition to real estate. For many folks, that means, getting a real estate license. It could mean starting to flip some houses. It could mean becoming a landlord. What did that look like for you?
That's a really good question, and it's always funny looking back like 5 years later, because it's like, oh well, it was easy and obvious, but at the time it was actually like a big question mark, because we both had comfortable jobs in the corporate sector, making a good income. And if you let it all go, you let go of that paycheck, but then you get all your time back. And what actually happened is that when we got together with my at the time girlfriend, now wife, we both had a condo, and we decided that she would move in with me because it was the smallest one. So we would rent hers, who was the largest one, which I think now was the right choice. So we renovated a little bit. We got it to rent, and she's absolutely amazing. She had a vision. She said, we're going to renovate the kitchen. I'm going to rent it to some expats and I'm going to get a corporate check every month. And I was like, yeah, okay, great. And that's exactly what she found in terms of tenants. And it made me realize like, wow, I never at the time took into account the marketing part of real estate. And for us, it was something that we understood. It was something that we knew and that we felt like we could educate ourselves about, which is an absolutely key component. And it was something that we could more or less control. Like if you buy in a good neighborhood, you know it's going to appreciate. And then if you force appreciation by doing some renovations, you're kind of you keep building some of that margin of safety in terms of value. So that's what we did. And then we bought another property, and then we just kind of went from there with some smaller properties. And now we're starting to pivot since last year with buying land and also doing some development. So going back to your question and the transition, it was actually really scary, but I knew that deep down, I knew I wasn't happy with what I was doing and building value for somebody else. And when you trade your time for money, at the end of the day, it is what you do. And I always thought it was funny. The quote is like, "Oh, salary is actually is actually the drug they give you to make you forget your dreams." And at some point, I just didn't want to. And it already been about 2 years that I was listening to a lot of real estate podcasts and reading books and stuff. And at some point, the best way to know is just to jump in and do it. So that's what we did. So my wife kept her job, and I like to say that I spent money while she earned it, and I invested for us long term.
So what I'm hearing you say is that, you realize that you weren't happy in your job and your career. You felt there was an opportunity to grow within real estate and get some more of your time back. The plan you came up with was your wife would focus on the career, kind of hold down the fort from a financial standpoint, while you kind of took the risk as an entrepreneur. And that's very familiar to us. It's the same thing me and my wife did. So it makes complete sense. For someone who is listening and maybe they're feeling where you were feeling, but they're looking at their money, they're looking at their numbers, they're looking at the income, and maybe they don't feel that there's enough there to make that sacrifice to go from a 2-income household to a 1-income household. What would you say to them? And what advice would you give them to help them maybe get more comfortable or make some adjustments so they can make that transition?
That's a really good question, John. Like it's every situation is different. Every couple has a different story, and it's relevant for them given what they're going through right now. Now, it's not every couple that can afford to go for 6 months from a 2-income to 1 income. But the advice I would give them is whoever is gonna make that jump, you've got to make sure that it's not instantaneous. And if they tell you that it is, they're lying to you. It takes time, but you have to find a way within 3 to 6 months to be able to replace some of that foregone income with something else. And some, I know people that have started to wholesale. Some have started to do some leasing on the side. So they invest, but then to make some money, they would, take on big buildings and they would go out and lease them and do the visits and so on, because they knew they were still getting a couple $1,000 a month, which would allow them to live on the short term. So the advice for those who are looking to do that transition is have a bit of a plan, try to have a bit of a financial cushion, let's say about 3 to 6 months of finances ahead of you, and then make a plan. So whatever it is that you're doing, you within 3 to 6 months can start to generate a little bit of income. Now, we both know, John, you buy a multifamily, even a small multifamily, let's say a 6 unit, you do some renovations and stuff, you're not going to live off of it for a while, probably not until you refinance. And that could take a year and a half or 2 years, or in some cases more. So you really have to, like, people who want to get into real estate to make money in the short term, they have to think about what is it that they're really trying to achieve, because it's not going to replace their monthly paycheck right away.
Yeah, I love that advice, right? And it's really sobering to a lot of people. Real estate is a great way to build wealth, but it doesn't necessarily generate great cash flow out of the gate. So it's a patient game. It's a long-term approach, particularly depending on the investment style, right? If you're buying a
Yeah.
rental, whether it be a small multifamily or syndication deal, whatever it is, I mean, those things are going to kick off a little bit of cash flow, but usually not enough to leave your W-2 job, right away. So make sure you've got another plan to generate income in the short term while you build up that equity, and maybe have, that larger equity event, whether through a refinance or the sale of
Mhm.
a property, or something else you're doing. So really good tips for anyone who's looking to go full time is make sure you've got something that's ancillary that can provide income while you're waiting on that long-term appreciation
Yeah,
for some of these assets.
yeah.
You mentioned that you were, you bought that house, or you moved in, your girlfriend, or at the time moved in with you, you're now your wife, you rented out that condo that she had, you went out and got some other properties, and you have since transitioned into more developments. Talk to us about that process, going from buying existing assets to developing assets from raw land.
Sure. So it oh man, I could talk about this for 2 hours. I'm gonna have to be careful. Is just that so we started with what we knew, which was our first multifamily was a 5 unit that lacked tender love and care. And we had a vision because there was a lot of potential. And we renovated, we transformed 2 1 bedrooms into 2 bedrooms because there was a lot of unused space. And we saw the power of, here we call it like, full on optimization of a property. And we basically took a property who was performing 50,000 a year, and we took no 30,000 a year, and we took it to 50,000 a year. Now it may not seem like much, but when you go for refi and you bought the asset for about 500, and literally a year later you get it appraised at 850 and you refi on that value, it's, well, that was the first paycheck. It took me about a year and a half. uh, but it really gave us the confidence that we can do this. However, what we realized is that it's also very labor intensive. On the first project, I did some of the renovations myself. I still had a contractor, but I spent months over there doing some demolition and stuff. And I'm glad I did it for the first one. I would never do it again. And the reason for this is that now my time is better spent doing other things, finding other properties, closing deals, finding capital, and so on. And so when we did this first project, then we found another one. It was another 5 unit, very close to the metro. That one was making about 50,000 a year, and we took it to about 70 or 72, same thing, in about a year. And over there, we redid the facade. It was a stone facade, changed all the doors and windows, changed the new roof, new facade, take all the stone off, put it back. And then first we had to redo the foundation because it was like old stone from a century ago. And anyway, so very, very labor intensive. And when I say labor, there I did almost no work, but I coordinated everything. And to me, that's still almost too labor intensive. So we did a few projects like that. And then we realized if we're going to be that involved, our vision has always been to create. With my wife, we both kind of have the same angle, and we realized, especially also with what's happening in the market, and we'll talk about it in a bit. Here in Quebec, we have very strict laws. We're very pro tenant. For the Americans, it's going to sound like we're a socialist state. It's not. It's just very pro tenant. And so when you do work, it's actually quite hard to raise rent significantly because we want to protect the value that the tenants get anyways. And so that mixed with us wanting to do less active real estate investing and more asset management, it kind of led us naturally to that transition of doing new builds. And in my great scheme of things, I was like, we'll buy land and we'll build 50 units and this and that. Now, I didn't find that project, but I did find one for 16 units. And I always like to break down the risk. And the risk, obviously, there's a risk of, is that project going to be accepted by the city? And then once it is, there's the execution risk. Like, am I going to be able to find and build good enough of a team to build this on time and on budget?
Hey,
And in
Axel,
order
I
to,
wanna I
yep,
wanna jump I wanna jump in. Sorry, just because I
yep,
think you're getting at a couple things that are really important. So one, you talked
sure,
about, you know, as a part of that transition, you did this 5 unit deal where you were able to go in there, create a lot of value, refinance, almost this burst strategy, right? To buy,
completely,
renovate,
yep,
rent it out, refinance, repeat, right? So you're able to
eat,
go out there and you're able to execute this plan. But some of the policies that you faced, particularly in Canada, where there's a limitation of how much you can push rents. There's some other, legal red tape that's limiting you. And you realize, this is a lot of work, a lot of time that I'm putting into this. I'd rather be an asset manager versus, doing the demolition and things like that.
Yeah.
That kind of led you into the space. And the reason I wanted to pause and get into this is I think so many people who are investing in real estate, they're doing the strategy that they taught or whatever they saw first, and they're not necessarily taking inventory of, do I enjoy this? Is this fulfilling for me? Do I get
Exactly.
excited about this? And if
Yeah.
not, I know that there's this culture of power through it, right? The entrepreneur grit. Like, we don't, who cares that,
We don't
you're,
quit.
you're, you're tired. We don't, yeah, exactly. Right. It's just this grind
Yeah.
mentality. And what you're getting at is there's this smarter, more efficient, better way to grind. It's not to say you shouldn't work hard, but you also need to take inventory of, how does this work make you feel? Are you excited about the stuff you're doing, or can you
Mhm.
take those same hours, that same time that you're investing, and repurpose it into another aspect of real estate investing? And that's what you've done. And I think that's the thing I want to pull out of this conversation is, you looked at internally and you said, okay, this worked. I took the income from 30K to 50K on this project. I took this one from 50K to 72K. That's great. You're able to refinance. You're putting money in your pocket, but there's more to investing than just the returns. It's also kind of
Mhm.
that intangible of, how do you feel? Do you feel like you spent your time wisely? Do you feel rejuvenated? Are you excited about the work you're doing? Are you
Yeah.
creating something? And I'm getting the sense that, maybe you felt there was more you could be doing, or at least a better way to invest in real estate and to serve other people.
Absolutely. And you bring in a concept that I find is not taken or talked about nearly enough in real estate investing, is the return on impact.
Mm,
Everybody wants the return on investment, but the return on impact in terms of what is it that we can provide for people around us, and even for ourselves. Because, and I'm glad you cut me off on my tangent going into development, because you're right that at some point I started to wonder, like, is this what I want to do? Is this how is my time best spent? And I realized afterwards that I actually also really like working directly with the city. I also like putting a team together, and the architect and the engineers and urbanism and all that. And so it's always the question of, I'm doing this, yes, because it's lucrative and because I create wealth over time. Let's be honest about it completely. But then in real estate, there's so many different facets. There's so many different ways to skin that cat and to build value. It's just that you have to be true to yourself in picking a lane that actually corresponds to your strength and your values and how you want to make an impact for everyone around you.
yeah, Nax, I think the thing that's really cool too. I mean, you talked about just the limitations in Canada, and there are obviously investors who are in cities that, in the United States, that have very similar rules or limitations. New York and,
Mhm.
LA are two that come to mind right away. But development seems like a great way, and I don't want to say to curtail, but maybe you don't have the same level of red tape. Certainly, it's hard to get those development projects off the ground, but you don't have the same restrictions because this is something you're creating that doesn't exist today. So talk to
Yeah,
us a little bit more about kind of that transition with development, and why you were so excited to maybe move into that lane.
sure. So well, you've mentioned some of the aspects, and one vision. I always felt like I had a bigger vision than just saying I'm going to optimize or renovate a 5 or 6 units. I always felt like I could do more. Two, like more specifically to Canada and Quebec, well, Canada overall, there is huge demand for housing. We don't build nearly enough. Even an average year in terms of mise en chantier, construction starts, we build about half or two-thirds of what we actually need in order to meet demand. So and then from a very basic economic standpoint, that pushes rent on the upside, of course, and we're all happy about it. However, we still need to add new dwellings. And so this is kind of the lane now that I've been wanting to contribute in, because I like it and I want to, if I die tomorrow, that's the contribution that I want to have made to Canada.
I love it, man. I love it. So what are some things you know now about development that you wish you would have known before you got started?
Huh. So In terms of cost, add 30%, and in terms of time, double it. No, it's just that it's funny because I often reflect about that of like, if I was to restart that project now, what would I do? From a process point of view, there's a few things I would tweak, maybe to the team and to all this. But in the end, what affected us more has been the amount of time it took versus in the changing economic environment. Because I acquired this beginning of 2022. We're now almost end of 2023, and then in terms of the, I was going to say the economics, and for us the capital, we actually ran out of capital. Well, it's not that we ran out of capital. We properly used our capital and the budget for our development process. But by the time we were supposed to start building, the I mentioned before, our project went from 16 units to, we had a zoning change thanks to the city. And so now we're also in the process of acquiring the land next door. So now we resubmitted a new project for 60 units. So we've multiplied it by 4. Now, in terms of budget, we got to where we were supposed to be. It's just that now I'm kind of restarting my development process. Now, obviously, the land value has gone up a lot. Our project has become a lot more valuable. So I'm going to go back and raise capital. And that I'm fine with. It's just that what's going back to your question of what is it that I wish I would have known? I knew it was going to be hard. I just didn't realize how much up and downs there were. And in the end, that's the thing. That's the key. I know I will prevail. I know I will succeed. I don't have a glimpse of a doubt. It's just that in order to get there, whew, man, it's longer, it's more expensive, and all that. But it's okay. At the end of the day, I know I'll make it.
Well, when you said zoning change, I know a lot of people probably was like, oh man, but it sounds like the zoning change was in your favor and actually
Huge.
created a greater opportunity for you than
Yeah.
maybe what you were originally anticipating. We know
Mhm.
for some folks it goes the other way, which is heartbreaking once you're already invested in the deal in the project. So it's great to
Yeah.
hear that this is actually going to be a more lucrative and a bigger benefit for what you're doing. And I love the term you said before, return on impact. And that's really key. I think that return on impact is a great way to think about the work you're doing as an investor and the impact you're making in the community and
Mhm.
having something that can maybe even outlive you. So great to hear that you've got that project going. You
Well,
started to talk about, yeah, go ahead.
so if I can just add on that, and the reason why that return on impact is so important for me is that that development is in a downtown location in a city just north of
Oh,
Montreal.
okay.
Across the street is a small university campus. We also have a big federal building, and the university campus directly works with the hospital because they train nurses over there. The hospital is about 800 meters, so half a mile for you Americans, okay? And we're between the road and the river, and we're, as I said, in the downtown. The train station is 400 meters away. The boardwalk that goes along the river stops at the previous streets. And so now I'm offering the city that I would give them a servitude if they want to prolong it along the river. And there's a university, there's a hospital, the train station, like, think, lifestyle. There's the boardwalk. And now the city wants to have businesses at the street level. So I'm working with the city on what kind of businesses do you want over there? They'd like food because downtown is a bit of a food desert. Perfect. Let's see what we can do. And for me, I obviously look at this project like it needs to make sense financially. Yes, I'm not doing this to, it's not just out of my generosity, but it's also how much can we contribute to the city in that neighborhood over the next 50 years by doing a properly designed project? And that's what I really care about, more than am I going to make a 9% return or an 11% return? That's not really what gets me up at night.
No, I love that. And I love the way you're thinking about it because it also opens the doors to so many other opportunities, right? If people see the way you develop and the way you make an impact on a city, you're going to be presented with other opportunities to do the same thing. So it's a great way to think about it with that return on impact approach, as opposed to just focusing on the return on investment. Let's talk about the economic environment. You mentioned that it's shifted a little bit. I know you spend a lot of time focused on data and looking at market selections and things like that. What are you seeing in the marketplace today?
Oh, same thing. Like, how long do we have to talk about this? I'll talk about the market that I know. Okay. In Quebec and Canada, some of the fundamental factors driving demand for us here is immigration. We have never had in Canada as much immigration. So that's net inflows of foreigners, basically, who come in to settle legally. They have a visa, they can settle, they can work, they can, and all this. We've had in the last 2 years, 1.5 million people. Okay, out of our population, that's actually a lot. An average year, I was going to say pre-pandemic, was about 400,000. We're now at 1.5 million in 2 years, and just in 2023, I think we will hit a million. So demand is very high. Okay, let's put that on one side. Now, we've all seen what happened during the pandemic. Every government injected so much money into the money supply, and we weren't producing anymore. So naturally, what happens in between the two, the ratio of the amount of money and the amount of goods that we produce, the ratio is called prices. And those prices, well, you put a lot more money, but not that many more goods, prices have to rise. We also saw massive inflation, also driven by energy factors and disruption in the world, disruption in supply chain, several wars, and so on. And in order to get in Canada, the Bank of Canada has an objective of keeping inflation between 1% and 3%. And we ended up at 8%. So what do they have to do? I mean, I was talking to some mortgage brokers who said, like, in 30 years, there hasn't been an increase in interest rate that quick, where we basically went from 1.5% to 5% within, I think, 60 months or something like that. It was now the effect that it had is that a lot of projects got canceled because they didn't make sense anymore. So we have a creeping demand for housing, and we basically have a supply of new housing that's fallen. So that keeps driving up rents, and that keeps making new projects even more valuable, even though they haven't been built yet. And so my vision with the project, and now, hindsight 2020, I'm thinking of my seller in beginning of 2022 who saw the writing on the wall maybe much faster than I did. It was like, I need to dump this property. I bought it from him, and I'm going to keep going. And luckily, because of the zoning change, we've made the project a lot more viable. But it's the fact that the demand is there. For me, it's still worth it to keep plowing ahead, because interest rates, yes, they're high. They're making it a lot more difficult, but they are going to come down eventually. Same thing with the prices of material. And because there's been so many cancellations, availability of labor has come back, where it was a huge issue for 2-3 years. So now I used to call contractors. They wouldn't even call me back. My contractors call me for work. Hey, your project, when can I get the bid? When are we bidding? When are we, like, oh, that flipped around. And so as much as the economic environment has brought some difficulty, I'm still very optimistic actually for the future, because Canada, I was going to say, like the US, is actually pretty well sheltered for a number of geographical reasons, and also from an economic standpoint. So yes, it's harder, and we all thought that by the end of 2023, beginning of 2024, it was going to get a lot better. Now we might be 2025, but I invest for the next 30 years. This is just a small bump on the road. And people who get discouraged because of interest rates and stuff, hey, you buy, you marry the property. You only date the interest rates, because at least for us here, every 5 years we get to renegotiate with the bank. So as long as you find a good property where the cash flow makes sense, the interest rate, you can find a way to work with it.
You talked about dating the interest rate, marry the property. I liked your long-term approach as far as the assets you're investing in, and that's going to alleviate a lot of concerns and still give you the confidence to move forward with these projects, because you're not focused on, the return over the next 2 years or 3 years. You're looking at it more from a broader view, and I think that kind of goes back to your return on impact approach, which is really savvy, and I think will open up a lot of opportunities for the things you're working on today. For folks who want to learn more, you've got a podcast called The Very Real Estate Effect, and they can go to your website, realestateeffect.ca. Of course, we're talking about Canada, so .ca, and we'll make sure we link to that in our show notes there. Right now, Axel, we're going to go to our round of insights. Are you ready?
Sure.
All right. Give me a failure or an apparent failure that sets you up for later success.
Well, one of our first projects, I thought it was a complete failure, because I thought I was going to be able to do it much faster. And it made me realize, that's the one where I did like months of demolition by myself. It made me realize how valuable that experience had been, because then I wasn't fooled or tried to be fooled on other projects. So I don't want to say there's a silver lining in everything, but looking back, that whole period was extremely formative. So I'm thankful for it.
Give me a digital or mobile resource you recommend for your business.
So we have one here that in terms of property management, it's really tailored more to the Canadian market. It's called Proprio Expert, and it really helps with, here we have to do some, for rent increases, we need to take a whole bunch of factors into account, and it really helps with that. And so it's proprioexpert.com. It's good for all of Canada and probably the US. And so that's been a digital resource that's been extremely helpful for us in streamlining our operations and our real estate business.
Yeah, the French came through really thick on that one. So you're gonna have to spell that. You're gonna have to spell that app or that website for us again.
Sure, Proprio Expert. So Proprio, P-R-O, and then expert, experts.com. I'll send you afterwards. I'll send you the website just to make sure I have it correct.
Got it. Proprioexperts.com or .ca?
I believe it's .com.
All right, excellent. Thank you. I know my editor was gonna be like, "What?
Yeah, what the hell was that? That's not helpful."
Yes, I appreciate you sharing that. All right, give me the book you've recommended or gifted the most in the last year.
Ooh, in the last year, I've recommended, because I read it. It's one of the very first books I read, and still nowadays, when people ask me like, what should I read? I say The ABCs of Real Estate Investing by Ken McElroy. That book I read that before Rich Dad Poor Dad and before any of this, and it was a friend who told me, if you like real estate investing, you should read this. And I find still to this day, it's not that long, it's pretty concise, it explains very well. So The ABCs of Real Estate Investing by Ken McElroy, who's, by the way, a fabulous investor, who should get, to me, in my view, a lot more credit than what he's getting.
No, it's a great book. One of my first reads as well to get me focused on real estate. So great recommendation there. All right, give me a daily habit that helps you stay focused on your goals.
Oh, that's a good one. I have a 4 and a 6-year-old, and right now we wake up early to go to school, and right now there's a bus strike, so the routine is a bit changed, and so we have to wake up our daughter, who's 4 years old, a bit earlier, and sometimes she gets grumpy and stuff. And when I go and wake her up, wakey, and I say, today's gonna be a beautiful day, today's gonna be great. And we've been teaching our kids, because we do it ourselves, to retrain our mind that when we wake up in the morning, we try to have first positive thoughts about whatever we have to do, whatever's on the agenda, whatever does our calendar say, is to say today's going to be a beautiful day. And since I've restarted like actively doing this, I've been noticing the impact, and that I would strongly encourage others to try it as well.
Positive thoughts first thing in the morning. I love it. All right. Give me your number one insight for developing new projects.
Work with the city, see what they want. Even before you can make an offer, you can put the land under contract, but before you do anything, work with the city, because at the end of the day, once you're working with them instead of against them, everything changes. So my biggest insight in development would be find out what the city wants and what the community around wants, because that's how you maximize your return on impact.
All right, let's lighten the mood. You are based in Montreal. Give me your favorite place to grab a bite to eat.
Actually, it closed. It closed during the pandemic. It was l'entrecôte Saint-Jean. It was l'entrecôte. There was only one dish on the menu. It's just that you chose whether you wanted the salad or the soup before, and it was just a good old steak and fries, like a French brasserie. And so that place closed about 2 years ago. There's plenty. Montreal has such an amazing food scene. Anyone who's listening to this podcast who wants to come, get in touch with me. I'll send you a list.
I love it, man. You mentioned that place has one dish on the menu. You just pick your soup or your salad. I gotta tell you, I went to back when I was in advertising, I used to travel a lot for shoots, and we did a shoot in Leadville, Colorado.
Okay.
And I was in this really small town, and it was literally a saloon looking restaurant. And they had the specials outside on a little kind of a board. And I walk inside and ask for a menu, and they're like, "Did you not see the board outside?" And I was like, "Oh, that's the entire menu? Got it." So there were two options. It was like steak and potatoes or spaghetti, and like you pick which one you want. That was
Yeah,
it. Like,
that's
oh,
it.
okay. So I was like,
But
yeah,
was it? Did you have a good meal?
I recall the only thing I remember from that trip was not being able to breathe. Every morning, it felt like someone was choking me and then
Oh
let
no,
go right when I woke up, just because the
the
air level.
altitude.
So the
Yeah,
altitude was crazy. I would take the toothpaste cap off, and the toothpaste would squirt across the
yeah, yeah,
room.
yeah. Yeah,
It was
under
just,
pressure.
yeah, it was just I'm asthmatic, so my body wasn't ready for that.
Oh
And so, like I said, it was just like, ooh, okay. The
yeah,
pressure here is you hear people tell about that. You hear about Olympic athletes training out in that weather. And Denver is not even as high as I think this place was, but it was I mean, she was great. The air was clean once you kind of adjusted to it. But the
yeah.
food, I don't recall the food being bad. I also probably ate a lot of really nice meals at that point. So maybe that one was not my favorite, but I don't remember it being bad.
But if I may say though, there's an interesting parallel between the restaurants who only do one dish, where often they're
Yeah,
super good at it, and picking your lane in real estate, like we talked about.
absolutely, and knowing your audience though too, right? So
Yeah.
in a place like that, it was it's a small town. I mean, it's a town. It
Mhm.
was a saloon, so it wasn't a tourist attraction. You weren't getting people coming all over from different states and countries. I mean, this is a place where it was locals.
Yeah.
They knew I was not from there the moment I walked up. But they obviously enjoyed the place, and I think there's something for kind of catering to the audiences, like you said, working with the city, right? Understand what people want and being able to play off of that. Axel, you gave us a lot of great stuff today. You talked about kind of your background, your transition into real estate, starting with kind of that condo, using that to transition into smaller multifamily before ultimately getting into development. And you talked about, understanding yourself, figuring out what you do well, what do you enjoy, making sure you get that return on impact, not just the return on investment. I think that's a great takeaway for all of our listeners. But then also what it takes to make that transition, going from kind of a two-income household to a one-income household, being realistic about what the ebbs and flows from a cash flow standpoint are going to look like, while you ultimately start to build up your income and build up more wealth through real estate. And then ultimately just understanding too, what does it look like to scale this portfolio and make that larger impact in the community and build up your legacy. Again, for folks who want to learn more about you, they can go to your podcast first, The Very Real Estate Effect, or they can check out your website, realestateeffect.ca. Axel, thanks again for being a great guest and coming on Multifamily Insights. We look forward to staying in touch with you, and I hope you have a great day.
Thank you very much, John. It's been a pleasure participating today.